Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Adventures of a Real Estate Investor. I'm Susie.
And I'm Michael, and we're excited you joined us for this adventure.
So today's guest is a very special guest. And I only say that because I feel like I stalked him on his podcast. But today we have Anthony Vicino. And yes, if you're watching the video, you get to see my fabulous fingers because that is the Italian way.
Hand. Yeah.
So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. That's the key to really saying the name. It's like, you know how in different languages they have like umlauts and different like ways of expressing over vowels and things like that. That's how you say my name, is with the fingers. Like that's the only way. If you don't use your hands, then you haven't really said my name.
No, I love it. I do. And then just to let our listeners know, so yes, this is technically the first time like actually meeting Anthony, which thank you again for talking to strangers. But like I was turned on to your podcast, Brain Dump, and I actually was listening to it while I was running. And I swear, like, that's where $1 million ideas came in. I was like, this is fabulous. And that's where I just like kept creeping into different podcasts. I was like, because, you know, when we're on a lot of podcasts, it feels like we're on repeat. So I kind of like dug through to be like, okay, how is this one different from all of the same titles over there? But so, I mean, I just really wanted to have you on. You're super big. I mean, something else that really stuck out about you actually was return on life, which I'd love to talk about like further into the podcast. But since we're so huge on return on investment, it was like, oh, somebody else.
Return on impact.
Oh, sorry. Return on impact. Wow. I was like thinking about what not to say. You know, that's just happened.
Yeah.
But since we're so focused on return on impact, I was like, oh, I like this. This is cool. So again, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you guys. I really appreciate all of that. I think, first of all, if you had $1 million idea from listening to the Brain Dump, then I believe we're entitled to royalties. So I'm just saying. I'm just kidding. We really I really appreciate you saying that. One of the reasons that we started the Brain Dump, because I also have another podcast, Multifamily Investing Made Simple, and that's fun. Like we love talking about real estate. But Austin Linney and I, when I went on his podcast, and it was the first time we ever met, and for the first 20 minutes, we didn't talk about real estate at all. We just talked about mindset stuff. And we're like, let's just do a podcast that's all about this. And so we started the Brain Dump. And it's been funny because if you want to be a successful real estate investor, it starts in the mind. It starts with your perspective. And so we say it's kind of a real estate show, but it's really not, but it's a lot of fun.
No, it is a lot of fun. And I like, funny coincidence, actually, I listened to that podcast yesterday, and I swear, like when you said you were a psychology major, like I feel like I felt Austin light up like, ooh, I have an idea now. We can do this, Like I was so excited. I was like, oh, I wonder if this is where it started. And so that's actually
it was that moment. I remember that point in the conversation because we were talking, and I don't tell people this very often. I don't tell them about my degrees and my schooling because it's not super relevant. I went to school and quickly decided not to use a lot of the things I learned there and went into entrepreneurship. That all ties back together. And I remember that moment in the podcast because Austin's like, man, it's like you're a psychologist or something. I'm like, well, I guess technically I have a degree. So.
Yeah, I thought that was cool.
Just to hit on, I just want to touch on something real quick, Anthony, before we get into your background and like why you started investing in real estate. But one thing you mentioned is like, you don't mention everything that you've done prior. Like you don't mention the degrees and everything like that because it's not relevant. A lot of people get stuck there, right? They're doing something. They're like, well, this isn't what I went to school for, or this isn't what I grew up learning or whatever. And like, it's again, a whole mindset shift, right? Like there's so many things that you learn and while you're growing as a person during that entire experience that has shaped you who you are now. And like, you don't have to tie your identity to those degrees and things like that. You can be who you want to be. So.
Yeah, it's identity, right? Like we tie our identities up with these things that we do, and we go to school and we get this degree, and therefore we think that's what I have to do because it's the sunk cost fallacy of, well, I've already put this much time and energy into it, so if I stop doing it now, then it was all a waste. And it's really not. If you can just realize that who you are tomorrow is not dependent on who you were yesterday, only on who you are today, then you can pivot and make those changes and say, this no longer serves me, or I've gotten everything that I need to get out of this thing. And now I want to move and do this other thing. And it becomes difficult because a lot of times there's two forces at play when you're changing your identity. One is yourself. You have to wrestle with like who you know yourself to be, but then also all the external factors of like friends, family, colleagues, and people who are like, well, you can't be a real estate investor. You're a school teacher. And they're like, well, I was a school teacher. I did that, but now I'm this. And it, like changing that in other people's minds can be a big obstacle for people. And realize like one of the best gifts that you can give yourself is just to realize that the only identity that really matters at the end of the day is the one that you have with yourself, not the ones that everybody else is projecting onto you.
No, which I love, because even when people are projecting them onto you, like you then project them onto yourself. And that's a whole, another rabbit hole, because then you're allowing other people's like thoughts and words like take over your own. And, that's horrible within itself, because we shouldn't do that. And so many people in society are, it's just, gosh, we could go so far into that. It just blows my mind, because we are all like our own person, but like somehow in this world, we all end up getting blended and caring about what every single other person thinks about us instead of caring about what we think about us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the age-old issue of like we value what others think of us more than we value what we think of ourselves. And that's almost a direct quote from Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. Like he was thinking these thoughts thousands of years ago, and they're still true today. Like so much of what we do is predicated on trying to impress the people next door, or making our dad proud, or not being ashamed to go to the high school reunion because everybody's going to be like, what do you do? You're not a this or that or the other thing. And so it's really interesting. Like this show, The Adventures of a Real Estate Investor, is ostensibly kind of about living a life of adventure and impact, and being able to like kind of be outside the norm of society and the pressures that come within that. And so it's already thinking tangentially to how others are approaching the topic of life. And so I love that. I think you guys are doing a really cool thing here.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, thank you.
So one thing I do want to point out again to our adventurous family is you mentioned Marcus Aurelius Meditations. Is this something that you read Marcus Aurelius every day, or have you in the past?
Yeah, so I don't read them every single day. What I do is I read a lot. First of all, that's like the thing that you have to kind of know about me is I read a lot of books, and I'm usually reading a bunch at the same time. But every morning I start my day by reading 4 pages of something that's more like spiritual or mindset oriented. Right now, it's actually Bruce Lee's Striking Thoughts, because he went to the University of Washington and was a philosophy major, as well as being like a badass movie star. And so I like to read things that like food for thought, inspire the soul, so to speak. And Marcus Aurelius's Meditations is my all-time most gifted book. If you're walking down the street and you smile at me, I'm like, "Ooh, here, have this book. It's gonna change your life." Like it's that good. And so I read it once a quarter, and it takes me about 2 weeks to get through. And I've been doing that for the last couple of years. It's just every time I go through it, you pick up something new, or it reminds you of something that you always knew, but that you have just been so busy by so many other things that you've lost focus on. And I think it's really cool to know that we as a human species, or as individuals, haven't changed at all in thousands of years. The things that we struggled with back then are the same things we struggle with. Like all the problems worth solving are all the old problems. It's not the new problems, like the social media stuff. That's a new problem. It's not really the root of it though. It's about connection and relationships. And like, that's an age old problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, it really is. And I love that you like even say that it's an old problem, because we think that like what we're doing now is something new, and we're not. But when we figure out like, hey, if we look like further back and see what other people did to try to get past this, maybe that can help me learn that about myself faster, instead of just trying to figure it out on my own.
Mm-hmm. Maybe you guys have this experience too, where I think we have this preconceived notion that our previous generations of people were stupider than us generally, like because they have probably access to less information. So you think of like somebody living 2000 years ago is like just generally not as intelligent, and they might not have as much information. But one of the things that's always like sticks with me is like how really smart our ancestors were, like freaky smart in so many different ways. So that's kind of cool. Like, even though we have more information these days, I don't think we're fundamentally any smarter than we were And so there's a lot to be learned from like old wisdom that's been passed down through generations and generations over time. It's not like, oh, that's cute and novel. No, it's like, no, that's deep and that's to the point. And like they knew what was worth knowing.
I would even suggest that they were even smarter than we are, because like we have so much information, we have then so much distraction, right? Whether that's social media or just the internet itself, like it's just inundated with so much information that just distracts you. And so you don't have time to sit and reflect, right? Like Marcus Aurelius is like, these are a lot of these reflections where he had like long periods of like just sitting and thinking and writing down his thoughts and things like that. So like, I feel like a lot of people don't have that now, that time. And only like, you know, once you're an entrepreneur and then you move to that period where you're like, okay, now I need to hire everybody to take over all the things that I don't need to do in the company, right? When you move towards like that one role that you're really good at, then and only then do you have time to like sit and think and reflect, right? But yeah, I think there's a lot of people who are struggling with finding time to reflect and actually think versus just getting pounded with a bunch of information.
You know, the other aspect of that too is that, for better or worse, our education system didn't teach us how to think in ways that are actually useful, which is funny. Like if you think about the schooling system, it's all about memorization, conformity, how to like fit into society's mold. But it doesn't really teach you how to think critically and sift through your thoughts. Like it's always been really frustrating to me because like I consider myself a writer and like that's one of my core skill sets. And when you look in school, they didn't teach us how to write. They taught us how to write essays. And that's a shame because I think writing is really, you know, thoughts made manifest into reality. And so when you're writing, you're actually having to wrestle with all these thoughts that you think. And one of the things that I find with so many people is that they never stop to reflect on what it is that they actually think on a topic. They just regurgitate the headlines or what other people that are smarter, air quotes, than them have already said on the same topic. But then when you get down to it, it's like, what do you think on that? People really stumble and they struggle because it's a skill set that they weren't given. They weren't nobody helped them develop it. And now they feel uncomfortable when they try to, because it's different. And that's really like the core, like what meditation is for me, is not just thinking. It's just about like being quiet with your thoughts and how uncomfortable that is for any period more than 32 seconds.
Right. And that's really where it sticks, is 32-second mark.
After 32 seconds, it's like, oh man, I'm in a prison. I got a monkey brain. This thing's weird.
I just finished Einstein's biography by Walter Isaacson.
Yeah.
And
That's a great one.
Yeah. And one of the big things that he was a proponent of, right, like was, you know, the new Western education was so about like learning facts and regurgitating these facts like we were talking about, right? Like learn how to write an essay. This is how you write an essay. There's no other way to write an essay, right? And there's no other way to write but this, you know, X, Y, Z. But I think it was all telling us, or it's teaching us how to conform to society and like how to follow instructions and be really good workers, right? Factory workers and not really, you know, opening up, you know, free thought and things like that. So Einstein, when he was challenged to regurgitate like what the speed of light was, he's like, I don't know the speed of light. I can't tell you that number because, you know why? Because it's written in a book somewhere and I know where that book is at, right? I declutter my mind of all this useless information that is found somewhere else, and then it allows me to actually have deep, meaningful thoughts. So yes. Really.
One of the most like critical mistakes we make is confusing knowing about a thing with knowing a thing. And there's a fundamental difference. Like you can know about a thing. I know I could probably get closer to the speed of light than Einstein could just from like just having read on it, right? But I don't know it as well as he does. And because I don't know it, I don't have the ability to bend and shape the rules in my mind and put them together creatively. And like creativity is like the skill that separates, you know, the above average from just the average, and like the ability to take ideas and concepts that aren't connected in obvious ways and then to put them together in new ways that nobody's ever done before and be like, look at this new thing that I just created. It wasn't like from memorization. It was from like this tinkering and like this understanding of things.
So I know our listeners are like, okay, this guy is just dropping so much awesome knowledge right now. And like,
none of it real estate. They're like, what do I do? I want to buy a building.
No, I love this. I love this conversation. But I want you to share with our listeners, you know, a little bit more about who you are, Anthony. They're like, who is this guy dropping all this awesome knowledge? And then we'll continue the conversation after that.
So yeah, we'll go give like the 50,000. I was going to say square foot view. That's a weird view. I don't know what that even looks like. But the thing you have to know about me is that I have severe ADHD, and you maybe like surmise that already just from this one episode. Coming out of college, I got a bunch of degrees, but it was unclear to me what I was ever going to do with any of that stuff because I'm just not really made for the corporate workforce environment, like society's rules. I just don't jive with them. So coming out of college, I knew I had to find a different path. That took me down the road of being a professional rock climber for a number of years, which sounds really cool, but it just means I live in the dirt and climb rocks all the time. And then many years later, I had this opportunity from a friend to start helping build businesses and discovered that was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed that. I was not entrepreneurial growing up. I wasn't the kid that like plucked out flowers from his neighbor's yard and then sold them back to the old lady down the street. Like that was never me. So getting into business wasn't something I ever thought I was going to do. But once I got into it, I realized that a lot of the skills and habits that I had to develop in my own life to help frame my energy or my potentiality, right? That's the big thing with ADHD is like we're just infinite potential. It just scattered everywhere. If you can find a way to hyper focus it, you can be very effective. And so that was like the biggest success in my life is really figuring out how to focus my light into a laser and being able to then take that same framework and apply it to business and to real estate investing has allowed us to build a lot of really cool, awesome things. So that's what I do. I build really cool, awesome things right now. One of those big, awesome things is a multifamily acquisition company that is based here in the Twin Cities of Minnesota. So we go and we buy awesome apartment buildings. We partner with passive investors sometimes. We're vertically integrated because we like to do things the hard way. And that means that we handle our residents. We have employees that handle our investors. It means a lot of work, but a lot of fun. So that's me from like the really scattered high level.
No, thank you for that. I do want to ask you one question because I know Michael probably wants to dive into a lot, but for people who have ADHD, like what advice would you give them, right? Because like I've seen it in multiple people's lives where it can like really tear you down, especially during school, right? Like you don't really enjoy those standardized tests and you don't do well. Like your teachers think that you're I guess messing around, I think is a good word to put, because even with ADHD, yeah. And you're not, right. And they just are like, oh, well, you're the bad kid. It's like, okay, well, that's not true. Like ADHD just doesn't have all, like what we know about it is like the iceberg tip and there's so much underneath. But from there, like throughout that lifestyle or just life, I guess, you get like pulled down and pulled down and pulled down and pulled down, you know? I mean, even people will tell you like, oh, you're never going to go anywhere. You're never going to do this, you know, the ones who are angry and mean. But so how do you like encourage others to move forward with that creativity? Because then that's a whole another space that a lot of people don't venture into. So it's like, okay, well, I was lonely over here. How am I not going to be lonely over here as well?
So it's interesting. As I get older, I observe more and more the truth that the thing you were told not to do when you were a child is the thing that everybody reveres you for when you get older. If you can like tap back into that. So if like you were always dancing and singing and drawing or whatever, like the thing was that you were always wanting to do when you were a kid and everybody's like, maybe just tone it down a bit. Don't do that right now. Like, and eventually you conform and you stop doing those things. If you find a way to stick with those or bring those back later in life, it's the things that everybody reveres you for later, where they're like, oh, so-and-so has all this energy. They're always thinking, they're so creative. Like those are the things that people know me for now. But when I was young, those were the things everybody was like, stop it, just sit there and listen and read that book. And that's really difficult. So one is recognize that in a lot of cases, your weakness will become your strength. Now with ADHD, the thing to really understand is that there's a misconception in a lot of people's minds about what it is.
Yeah.
So it's attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And a lot of people assume that means that we can't focus. And that's not the case. It's that we can't focus on things that we're not interested in. To a very high degree. Like you just can't get us to focus on anything if we're not interested in it. If we are interested in it, if we're passionate, if we're fascinated with it, then we go into what's known as a hyper-focused state. And this is a lot like the flow state. It's the cousin state of this Zen-like being in the zone. The problem for people with ADHD, when they go into hyperfocus is if the house starts burning down around them, there's a very real chance they won't get out of the house. So it can be very, very detrimental. And the issue for a lot of people is they don't control their environment in a way so that they're focusing on the things that are moving them forward in life. And so what often happens is they're like, I like sweets. I'm going to eat all the sweets, or I like video games. I'm going to play all the video games, or I like Netflix. And it's like these things that are really easy to get hyper focused on. And if you do that, then your life is going to be the result of just that one thing that you always do. But if you can find a way to create structure around yourself so that the things that you're fascinated with are moving you forward, like if you're a painter, if you create a structure where you're always painting and you're in that zone, you're going to become a great painter, right? And so realize that you have unlimited potential, but until you find a way to frame it and focus it, it is just diffuse. It's like the sun's energy. It is blasting out in all different directions. It's not going to cut through steel, but if you can take it and you can focus it, you can cut through anything. And that's really what you have to realize, is that you have infinite potential. And the only way to tap into that is by creating structure.
I love that. Yeah, I love that. So I've been diagnosed with ADHD as well, Anthony, and like I was medicated heavily for it for a while. And then I finally came off of that, because like what pisses me off the most is like you're a psychology major, right? So like all the psychologists are like, this is a normal person, right? It's very linear. Like you do A, then B, then C, and you follow this and you focus on this one thing, right? But like for us, I have a business coach, and she kind of, and like a life coach or whatever, she kind of helped me unlock this power within me. It was like, what you have, what she calls it, is a multiplier mind, right? I don't know if you heard that term before, but like, it's like, you don't do things in a linear fashion, right? You do multiple different things at the same time, and that keeps you interested, at least for me, right? And like, after she gave me the permission to do that, everything just changed for me, right? Like, but she said, like, be very careful, because like you had mentioned as well, like once you put yourself, like, if you can create a structure around it, then you can, like, you have a laser focus, right? And so for me, what I have to do every single morning is I have an anchor, it's called an anchor or whatever. Like I have to write down exactly what I'm doing that day, because I know these things are going to be success. These things I need to complete to be successful that day, right? Because they're parts of my goals or whatever. So that's one thing. And if I don't do that every morning, if I don't have my anchor, then the rest of the day is just like I'm bouncing all over the place. Like
it's shot.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's crazy. I resisted this for like the first 25 years of my life, was the idea of structure, schedules. And I just wanted to like wake up and go do my thing. I wanted to be free and spontaneous. And a lot of people, like, that is how they think about their lives too. And I wasn't doing a lot. I wasn't getting a lot done. And what's really interesting is when you sit down and you create like your time block schedule and you say, this is what I'm doing today and when I'm doing it. Yes, that is, you've created a little bit of a prison for yourself, but within that prison, you can now express yourself fully, because now you know, like, oh, I'm supposed to be working on this thing, and you can go be infinitely creative within that thing. Whereas when it's not on the schedule, it's impossible to choose a path, because you could go in any number. It's like the dog, when you put the bowl of food on either side of it and he can't decide which way he wants to go, and so he starves to death, right? Like that's not a real experiment that ever actually happened. Like it doesn't work like that in reality, but for the metaphor, it works very well, because like when you have equal choices of things that you could do in the moment, the inclination is to do none of it. Like we've all been there. It's like, I got to do this, I got to do that. And the other thing, instead, I'll just sit here. I'll do none of it. And like, that's not helpful. So like, you have to create this structure.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is super true. And like, thank you for explaining all of that, because like, even within the podcast, right? Like impact is huge. And I hope even like one person out there listens who either has like a friend or a colleague or a child or themselves, right? Who has ADHD, who can be like, wow, I can do great things. Like that's the biggest thing for me, is that somebody else is doing it who I can like be as well. I don't have to be like the box that people have been putting me in. So thank you. Thank you. Because I think that's huge.
Definitely. And even for people that are listening to this that don't have ADHD, like what I'm finding is that, we talked about it earlier, it's a very distractible society that we have now. And for a lot of reasons, like there's a lot going on. And I think everybody struggles with procrastination and focus, whether or not you actually have ADHD. ADHD is one of those things that everybody's like, oh yeah, my ADD kicked in. It's like, yeah, I mean, yeah, you either have it or you don't. Like it's not a thing that sometimes you have and sometimes you don't have it. But that's okay, because I think what's really interesting is if these things work for me and like my mind, what I've noticed is that they also work for people who, like, air quotes again, have a normal mind, whatever that really means, because I think we all struggle to be effective and like move towards our goals, whether or not there's like, regardless of how your brain works. Because at the end of the day, we're all just human, and like Facebook is really addictive.
Yeah.
And full of garbage. But so like even going along with that, because I think this is something that I really do enjoy about you, is like that return on life, because we miss out on that. And I've actually been talking to Michael about this the past few days, is how like we act like we have an abundance of our life when like we're actually really not taking care of it, right? Like we work too much, or we don't eat well, or we do things where we procrastinate and go down this circle where the things that we're doing aren't moving our needle. So can you kind of explain a little bit like what return on life means to you?
You know, for a long time, I struggled with this balance between achievement and fulfillment. And I would say this took me 30 years really to figure out. Because when I was young, I was always focusing on doing and achieving and like winning that award and doing this other thing. And like at the end of it, I would get that to the end and I'd be like, I don't feel any different. And like there was no celebration, there was no huzzah moment. It was always like on to the next thing. And that probably resonates with a lot of people who are listening to this, where it's like, yeah, I do this thing and then it's just on to the next goal, on to the next goal. There's no sense of like, it feels like there's a hole inside of you and that you can fill that hole by achieving. If I win that gold medal, I will fill that hole, because that's what fulfillment is like, we're not full, right? It's like this concept of how do I fill everything? But you can't do that with achievement per se, like, because it's a different medium. It's like trying to mix concrete with spaghetti noodles. Like you can't fill a concrete hole with spaghetti noodles. And that's like what the achievement and fulfillment dichotomy is predicated on. And for me, what it came down to was starting to understand and tie together why I wanted to achieve things, and like understanding the underlying motivation for wanting that thing. And then understanding like, if I'm living in alignment with like my highest self, then it's not about the goal, like, because the goal is never actually attained ever. Like you're never done. It's a path that goes ever onward. And so living in your highest truth is showing up in every instant and recognizing that, like what we mentioned before, like there really is no future, there really is no past, there's really just now. And so in this moment, what are you doing to manifest your greatest self? And that's all like really hoo-ha talk, where it's like, what does that even mean?
It is
Like,
not.
I don't know. It's like, I don't know what it means. I can't explain it to you. All I know is that inside of us all, we realize when we're not moving towards our greatness. Like, you know it. You feel it in your heart. And recently I've been listening to somebody who was talking about the science of achievement versus the art of fulfillment. And I thought that was a really cool framework for thinking about this, because achievement really is a science. Like if you do this and that, and then the other thing, you will have achieved the thing. Like put in the work, go win, practice the thing, go win the game. Like that's how you do it. Like, build a business, do this and that, the other thing, then profit wildly. But fulfillment, the art of it is that it's different for everybody. And you have to really figure out, and like, this is where self-awareness is the superpower, and really understanding yourself and like all the factors that came together to create you in your life, and understanding like, what does it mean for you to make an impact on the world? Because it's different for everybody. And this is where you can't conform to just somebody else's definition of impact. And this is the problem, is that it is hard to dream your own dream. It's much easier to dream somebody else's dream. And it goes back to what we we're talking about, how to think. Like we don't know how to think through these things because they're big and they're scary and they're hard. And it's like, what if I choose wrong? I've dedicated my life to the wrong thing. And it's like, yeah, well, at least it was your thing.
Right? Yes. Oh, that was beautiful. I wish I could be like, boop. Right? You know,
I'll drop my mic, but it'll be very loud. So
no, and it's true. Like just living your own dream and knowing when like you're doing your own greatness, because there are so many people who even wake up in the morning and they already are miserable and don't want to go to work. That in itself is like a clue that you're not living your greatness. Like it is, but we don't accept it and we don't want to, because the hard thing is to leave. But I don't know, like from my point of view, like, is it that hard? You know, that's what I mean. Like how I feel like we have mixed around like scarcity and abundance with our life. Like we think that, like, I think we should have the scarcity mindset with our life in the fact that like we should recognize that right now we only have today, and that like we should not be wasting every single day. We're not going to have another today. We're not going to have another, you know, January 1st, 2021, January 2nd, 2021, like go on and on and on. And we just are like, oh, well, I'll do it tomorrow, or, oh, I'll get to it again and again and again. And it just blows my mind that not every day we're like, wow, I'm doing the things that I want to do. And that's me doing my thing, being my best, you know, having that greatest return on life.
One of the things when before we went on the air, we were talking about that I lived in the Bay Area of California for a number of years. And what's really interesting is the reason that I finally left California was because the weather was always too perfect. And when the weather is always perfect, you lose seasons. And when you lose seasons, you lose a framework for keeping track of time. And when you lose track of keeping time, you no longer have like these mental roots. And it's like, hey, what were we doing last May here? And like, every year feels the same. And so I left because I was like, I need the seasons to help root myself in time. But what is also very interesting is that when you think about habits and routines, they are by their nature designed so that you go and you do the thing with the least amount of energy expended as possible. And that's a great thing. But by definition, then they're not memorable at all. And if you live your life just from habits and routines all the time, you look back and you're like, I don't know what I did last week or today. Like how often do you go to bed at night and you look back on the day and you're like, what did I do today? And so this is why I'm a big fan of like end of the day scorecards, where you look back on your day and you're like, what did I do? What did I spend my time doing? And journaling, even very briefly, because again, this is a way of like making thoughts manifest into reality, is take those thoughts and take the time to think through your day. And what you can do to like really spike your life, if you really want to take it to that next level, is like every single day, ask yourself in the morning, like, what's the one activity that I'm going to do to make this an epic day? Like if this is your last day on earth, what would you do? What's the one thing that you could do to make it epic and memorable? Like if you can do one memorable thing every day, which you should, because all you have is today, like you're not guaranteed to wake up tomorrow. So like might as well make this one pretty darn good day.
No, and it's true, because we don't. And that's like the unfortunate part. And I know I said this earlier, but like we need to just see today as today, because like you said, there is nobody knows what's happening tomorrow. No one.
I had a conversation earlier today with this lady, and I basically said to her, like, for some reason it got brought up, like, you know, my morning routine or whatever. And I was like, yeah, when I realized that I wanted to start waking up when I wanted to wake up, not when I had to wake up, it changed my life. And she was like, oh my God, like I never thought about it like that before. Right? Because you're like, okay, I have to be at work by 9. So you backtrack that. It's going to take me so long to get ready and blah, blah, blah. And then like, you know, so then you set an alarm for the time that you have to get up. Right. But Susie and I set an alarm for the time that we want to get up. Right. So it's just completely different mindset. Yeah. And that was just mind blowing for her today. So I was glad I was able to impact her that way. But,
that's cool. It's such a small little mindset shift, but it's everything. Like, the biggest changes occur from the smallest shifts in perspective.
Yeah, could agree more. Well, unfortunately, Anthony, like I love this conversation. We had such an amazing conversation. However, it does bring us towards the end of the show, and which brings us to our Adventurous 4. These are 4 exploratory questions we ask every one of our guests. So, Anthony, the first question is, where is one place you wish to travel to and why?
Okay, so I'm a science fiction and fantasy nerd. Like, so in a previous life, I wrote a bunch of novels, and that was kind of my gig. And so I'm going to go with like the nerdy answer here is I would really like to go to like a planet that we have no concept for here in the solar system, like Venus, where it's like just acid rain. Like there's no way we can actually go there. It's like a horrible, horrible planet. But I'd like to go someplace where it's like completely alien. So let's say Venus or Jupiter. I think Jupiter would be kind of cool.
I like that.
That's awesome. Would you go to the spot?
Yeah, definitely.
Right
Was it like, and like visit all the moons of Jupiter? Like, I definitely want to see Ganymede because that's such a cool word. So
that's awesome.
That is awesome.
I actually have all the planets on my arm.
Oh, heck yeah. I didn't see that's cool.
So for all the listeners, I
Yeah.
have a tattoo of the solar system up my
So if you were in school, like your teachers would have been like, what is that, a cheat sheet? Like,
Right? Yeah. Well,
That's
unfortunately,
hilarious.
when I was in school, Pluto was still a planet. So I was thinking about getting like a
bring back Pluto.
a dotted line that says RIP or something like that, you know?
Yeah. Back when I was a kid, Pluto was still a planet. It's like how you know you're getting old. Love it.
And then the second question is, what is the number one thing on your bucket list and how are you leveraging real estate investing to achieve it?
It's funny. I just created a bucket list the other day, and really, like, I don't think that there's any one thing. The way I think about it is like, you have to be the change that you wish to see in the world, right? Like, I think there's a lot of truth in that phrase, and for me, I want to see people living out their greatness. And so the way that I do that is by trying to live out my own greatness. And really, real estate is a vehicle for that, not because of money, because I really don't need the money. Like, I'm fine on that front. It's a vehicle for every day getting to live out my greatness, which then opens the door for other people around me to see like, oh, maybe I could tap into my greatness too. Because I think as a society, we teach people to conform, which is to shut down their greatness and the things that make them unique and special. And then they feel weird when they start stepping into themselves because it's stepping out of what everybody expects from them. And so I think that's what real estate really is allowing me to do.
No, and I love that. And that's a very great answer. So thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. The third question, Anthony, is what is one piece of advice for someone who wants to start passively investing in real estate?
Do it.
I like it.
It's simple.
Yeah.
It's cool.
I mean, there's a ton of resources out there. There's an infinite amount of information. Like, we just wrote a book. Here's my shameless plug. Comes out August 11th, Passive Investing Made Simple. It'll teach you exactly how to passively invest. But at the end of the day, the information's easy. It's pulling the trigger and actually taking action. And that's the thing that most people will never do. And so at the end of the day, just do it.
That's
No,
great.
thank you for that. And then the fourth and final question is, if you had unlimited resources available to you, how would you leave an impact?
My big thing, and I've talked about it a lot on the show already, is like our education system and how it teaches us to memorize and conform and, like, you know, shut down the things that make us great. I would love to fundamentally change the education system. I have no idea what that would even look like, but change it in a way where people, they grow up knowing that they're special and that there's greatness, and they understand how to tap into that, like teach them how to think, how to be creative, and just generally how to not be part of the horde, but how to actually stand out and live their best life. And if we could start training the children, the youth of tomorrow with that, like, I think that would be an unstoppable army for good.
It would. And that's the biggest part, is like for good, you know? Like,
Yeah.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more. So Anthony, thank you so much. But before we go, would you mind sharing with the Adventurous family how they can get a hold of you?
Yeah, you mentioned it. You know, we talked about it. Go check out the podcast, Multifamily Investing Made Simple. If you want to learn how to passively invest, that's a good resource. We got a book coming out. Check out the Brain Dump. That's, I mean, tons of shameless plugging. But you can find me on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. I'm everywhere. I'm Anthony Vicino. Come find me. Have a conversation. I would love to get to know you. Yeah,
absolutely. And when you connect with Anthony, just tell him, hey, we heard you on the Adventures of Real Estate Investor podcast. And then, yeah, I'll definitely accept your connection there.
Definitely.
Right. That's the winner. But thank you.
That's what gets you through the door.
Right.
We have it's the golden ticket,
right?
Yeah.
That's fun. But yes, thank you so much for joining us. We really do appreciate it. And like, it's just been the best. So thank you again.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So until next time, explore more, adventure awaits.
Woo!